today valued at over $3 trillion, the most valuable company in human history. Its products are in the pockets of billions. Its brand is synonymous with innovation, elegance, and vision. But what few people know is that the man who created this empire was once an abandoned baby, a college dropout who slept on floors, a young visionary who was humiliated and thrown out of the very company he built with his own hands. This is the story of Steve Jobs, and how his greatest failures became the foundation of the most extraordinary comeback the business world has ever witnessed. Stephen Paul Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, California. But his birth was not a celebration. It was a crisis. His biological mother, Joanne Schiebel, was a graduate student from Wisconsin. His father, Abdul Fattah Jandali, was a Syrian immigrant pursuing a doctoral degree. They were young, unmarried, and Joanne's father threatened to cut her off entirely if she married a Middle Eastern man. Facing impossible pressure, Joanne made a decision that would haunt her for decades. She would give up her baby for adoption. There was one condition, she demanded. The adoptive parents had to be college graduates. She wanted her child to have every opportunity she couldn't give him herself. A lawyer and his wife were initially selected, but at the last moment they changed their minds. They wanted a girl instead. So little Steve was placed with another couple on the waiting list, Paul and Clara Jobs. Paul was a machinist and repo man who never finished high school. Clara was an accountant who hadn't completed college either. Neither met Joanne's requirements, but they made a promise. They would send Steve to college no matter what. Joanne reluctantly signed the papers, and Steve Jobs became the son of a working-class couple in Mountain View, California. But the knowledge of being given away never left him. Years later, Jobs would describe the experience as leaving a permanent scar. The feeling of being unwanted by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. Some psychologists who studied his life suggested this primal wound drove his relentless need for control, his obsession with perfection, his difficulty forming close relationships. The abandoned child who built products that billions of people would choose because he so desperately needed to be chosen himself. Paul Jobs was a meticulous craftsman who worked on cars in the family garage. He taught young Steve the importance of quality in everything, even the parts nobody would ever see. "If you're a carpenter making a beautiful chest of drawers," his father told him, "you're not going to use a piece of plywood on the back, even though it faces the wall. You'll know it's there, so you use a beautiful piece of wood on the back." For the rest of his life, Jobs would insist on this principle. The inside of a computer should be beautiful, even if no customer would ever open it. Elegance wasn't about appearance. It was about integrity. Growing up in Mountain View during the 1960s, Jobs was surrounded by engineers. The area that would become Silicon Valley was already filled with technology companies and defense contractors. Neighbors worked on lasers, semiconductors, and electronics. By age 12, Jobs was calling Bill Hewlett, co-founder of Hewlett-Packard, to ask for spare parts for a school project. Hewlett was so impressed that he gave the boy a summer job at HP. The seeds of a technological obsession were planted early. High school brought two transformations that would shape his destiny. First, he met Steve Wozniak, a brilliant engineer 4 years older who shared his passion for electronics and pranks. Where Jobs was driven by design and vision, Wozniak was a pure inventor, capable of building things that seemed impossible with limited resources. They were opposite personalities who fit together perfectly. Second, Jobs discovered a world beyond technology. He became fascinated with Eastern philosophy, vegetarianism, meditation, and the counterculture movement sweeping through California. He would carry these interests throughout his life, merging technology with spirituality in ways that confused his more conventional colleagues. In 1972, Jobs enrolled at Reed College in Portland, Oregon. It was an expensive private liberal arts school, and his parents had saved for years to afford it. But within 6 months, Jobs made a decision that terrified them. He dropped out. The classes felt pointless to him. He was spending his parents' life savings on an education he didn't value. But instead of leaving campus, Jobs did something unusual. He stayed as an unofficial student, sleeping on floors, collecting bottles to buy food, and sneaking into classes that actually interested him. One of those classes was calligraphy. It seemed impractical at the time. What possible use could beautiful lettering have for someone interested in technology? But 10 years later, when Jobs was designing the Macintosh computer, he insisted it should have multiple fonts and proportional spacing. It was the first personal computer with beautiful typography, a detail that seemed trivial but would transform how humans interacted with machines. If Jobs had never dropped out and wandered into that calligraphy class, the aesthetic revolution of personal computing might never have happened. The dots only connect looking backward, he would later explain. After leaving Reed, Jobs returned to California and took a job at Atari, the video game company. He was an unusual employee, arrogant, difficult, and prone to strong body odor because he believed his vegetarian diet eliminated the need for regular showers. His colleagues found him insufferable, but the company founder saw something in him and gave Jobs a special assignment. Design a game for us, and we'll send you to India. Jobs had become obsessed with finding a spiritual guru, and the opportunity to travel to India was irresistible. He spent 7 months wandering the subcontinent, shaving his head, wearing robes, and searching for enlightenment. He didn't find a guru, but he found something else. A deep conviction that intuition was as important as rational analysis, that simplicity was the ultimate sophistication, and that reality could be shaped by those who refused to accept its limitations. When Jobs returned to California in 1975, the personal computer revolution was beginning. Wozniak had designed a remarkable machine, a fully assembled circuit board that could be connected to a keyboard and monitor. It was elegant, efficient, and unlike anything else available to hobbyists. Jobs immediately recognized its potential. But Wozniak saw it as a project to share with friends. Jobs saw something bigger. He convinced Wozniak to start a company. They needed money, so Jobs sold his Volkswagen van and Wozniak sold his HP calculator. Together they raised $1,300. On April 1, 1976, Apple Computer Company was born. The name came from Jobs' time working on an apple orchard in Oregon. It sounded friendly, simple, and non-intimidating. Their first product was the Apple I, a circuit board that required customers to add their own keyboard, power supply, and case. Jobs sold 50 units to a local computer store for $500 each. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The Apple II changed everything. Released in 1977, it was the first personal computer that didn't look like a machine built by engineers for engineers. It came in a sleek plastic case. It had color graphics. It was designed to sit on a desk in a home or office without looking like laboratory equipment. Jobs obsessed over every detail, from the curves of the case to the fonts in the manual. Within 3 years, Apple was selling over 100,000 computers annually. The company went public in December 1980, making Jobs worth over $200 million at age 25. He was on the cover of Time magazine. He was the golden boy of American capitalism. But behind the success, problems were multiplying. Jobs was becoming increasingly difficult to work with us. His management style was brutal. He divided the world into 2 categories: geniuses and idiots. There was no middle ground. He would praise employees one moment and humiliate them the next. He took credit for other people's ideas while dismissing their contributions. He was brilliant at inspiring people, but terrible at managing them. The company was growing faster than his ability to lead it. In 1983, Apple made a decision that would prove fateful. They recruited John Sculley, the president of PepsiCo, to become Apple's CEO. Jobs personally courted Sculley with one of the most famous pitches in business history. Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world? Sculley was seduced. He joined Apple believing he and Jobs would lead the company together as partners. But partnerships with Steve Jobs never lasted. The Macintosh project became Jobs' obsession. He wanted to build a computer for the rest of us. A machine so intuitive that anyone could use it without reading a manual. He pushed his team relentlessly, demanding impossible deadlines and rejecting work that didn't meet his standards. The Mac launched in January 1984 with one of the most famous commercials ever made, a dystopian advertisement directed by Ridley Scott that aired during the Super Bowl. Apple positioned itself as the rebel fighting against IBM's conformist empire. But the Mac had serious problems. It was underpowered for its price. The screen was too small. There wasn't enough software available. Sales were disappointing after the initial launch. Jobs blamed everyone except himself. His behavior became erratic. He screamed at employees, countermanded decisions made by other executives, and created chaos throughout the organization. The board of directors faced an impossible choice. The company was struggling, and the man who founded it was making things worse. In May 1985, after months of internal warfare, the board sided with Scully. Steve Jobs was stripped of all operational responsibilities. The company he had created, the child he had nurtured from a garage into a billion-dollar enterprise, had rejected him. He was 30 years old, humiliated, abandoned once again by something he had built and loved. The parallels to his adoption were not lost on him. The wound of being unwanted reopened with devastating force. Jobs later called it the best thing that could have ever happened to him, but that realization took years. In the immediate aftermath, he was devastated. He wandered Europe for months, unsure what to do next. He considered abandoning technology entirely, maybe becoming a teacher or an astronaut. But eventually his restless drive reasserted itself. If Apple didn't want him, he would build something new. He would prove them wrong. Within months, Jobs founded Next Computer. He poured millions of his own money into creating the most advanced workstation the world had ever seen. The Next Cube was beautiful, powerful, and years ahead of its time. But it was also absurdly expensive and targeted at a tiny market of universities and research institutions. Sales were dismal. The company burned through cash. From a commercial standpoint, Next was a failure. But something else was happening during these wilderness years. Jobs was learning. At Apple, he had been a young tyrant convinced of his own infallibility. The failure of Next taught him humility. He couldn't just will products into success through force of personality. He had to listen, adapt, compromise. The experience softened some of his roughest edges without dulling his visionary drive. There was also Pixar. In 1986, Jobs bought the computer graphics division of Lucasfilm for $10 million. It was a quirky investment. A small team of animators who dreamed of making the first fully computer-animated feature film. For years, Pixar lost money. Jobs had to personally fund the company, investing over $50 million to keep it alive. Many investors would have walked away, but Jobs believed in the team and their vision. In 1995, Pixar released Toy Story, the first computer-animated feature film in history. It was a phenomenon, grossing over $370 million worldwide. When Pixar went public, Jobs' stake was suddenly worth over $1 billion. The failure of Next had been balanced by an unexpected triumph. Meanwhile, Apple was dying. Without Jobs, the company had lost its way. A succession of CEOs had tried and failed to revive the magic. Products were uninspired. Market share was collapsing. By 1996, Apple was 90 days from bankruptcy. The board was desperate. They needed something radical to save the company. They needed Steve Jobs. The return happened through an unexpected door. Apple decided to acquire Next for over $400 million, primarily for its advanced operating system. Jobs came with the deal, initially as an advisor, but within months, he had outmaneuvered the existing management and installed himself as interim CEO. The prodigal son had returned to the company that had cast him out 11 years earlier. What followed was one of the most remarkable turnarounds in corporate history. Jobs immediately killed over 70% of Apple's products, focusing resources on a small number of items that could be truly great. He negotiated an investment from Microsoft that kept the company afloat. He redesigned Apple's retail strategy. He simplified the product line into a simple grid: consumer and professional, desktop, and portable. In 1998, Apple launched the iMac, a translucent blue computer that looked like nothing else on the market. It sold 800,000 units in its first 5 months. The bleeding stopped. Apple was profitable again. But Jobs was just getting started. The iPod in 2001, the iTunes Store in 2003, the iPhone in 2003, the iPhone in 2010. Each product redefined its category. Each demonstrated Jobs' unique ability to see what consumers wanted before they knew they wanted it. He didn't just iterate on existing products. He reinvented entire industries. Music, telecommunications, computing, retail, everything he touched was transformed. By 2011, Apple had become the most valuable company in America, surpassing ExxonMobil. The boy who had been abandoned at birth, the dropout who had slept on floors, the visionary who had been thrown out of his own company, had built something unprecedented. But there was a shadow over the triumph. In 2003, Jobs had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He initially refused surgery, trying alternative treatments that medical experts considered useless. By the time he agreed to conventional treatment, the cancer had spread. He fought for 8 more years, continuing to work even as his body deteriorated. When he unveiled the iPad in 2010, he was already gravely ill. When he resigned as CEO in August 2011, handing control to Tim Cook, everyone understood what it meant. On October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs died at his home in Palo Alto. He was 56 years old. The story of Steve Jobs is not simply about business success. It's about the psychological architecture of genius and its costs. Jobs was capable of cruelty that bordered on abuse. He denied paternity of his first daughter for years while living in wealth. He reduced employees to tears with public humiliation. He was, by many accounts, not a good person in any conventional sense. Yet, he created things that genuinely improved human life. The graphical user interface that made computers accessible to everyone. The smartphone that put the internet in every pocket. The digital music ecosystem that saved the recording industry. The animation studio that produced some of the most beloved films of a generation. How do we reconcile the toxic behavior with the transcendent achievement? Perhaps the truth is that great accomplishment and personal virtue don't always align. Jobs channeled his wounds, his abandonment, his need for control into an obsessive pursuit of perfection that produced extraordinary results. The same psychological forces that made him difficult to love made him capable of changing the world. He found redemption not through becoming a better person, but through creating better things. The lessons of his life remain urgently relevant. That vision matters more than resources. That simplicity requires enormous effort. That failure can be the foundation of later success. That being fired from your own company might be the best thing that ever happens to you. That the dots only connect looking backward. That every setback contains within it the seeds of a greater achievement. Today, Apple is worth more than most countries. Its products are in the hands of billions. Its influence on technology, design, and culture is immeasurable. And all of it traces back to an abandoned baby, a garage, a dropout's dream, a devastating failure, and the greatest comeback in business history. Steve Jobs proved that reality is more flexible than most people believe. If you care enough and push hard enough and refuse to accept the world as it is, you can actually change it. Now tell me, what aspect of Steve Jobs' story surprised you most? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you want more stories about the entrepreneurs who changed our world.